The morning fog hung thick over the sprawling Gloucestershire estate as detective inspector. Sarah Matthews adjusted her radio and gazed up at the imposing stone facade of Camilla's private residence. The Queen Consort had been away on official duties in Scotland for 3 weeks. Leaving her beloved countryside retreat under the watchful eye of a skeleton staff, what should have been a routine security check following reports of unusual activity had quickly escalated into something far more serious. Matthews had received the call at dawn from Chief Inspector Williams, his voice tight with concern. Palace security had discovered discrepancies in the inventory records during a standard audit. Several items of immense historical and personal value to the late Queen Elizabeth had simply vanished from their documented locations. The items weren't just any royal artifacts, they were deeply personal keepsakes that the Queen had specifically bequeathed to various family members in her private will. As the enforcement team assembled on the gravel driveway, Matthews couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. The missing items included a diamond brooch that had belonged to Queen Victoria, handwritten letters from Princess Diana to her sons, and most significantly, a small leather journal containing the Queen's private thoughts during the final years of her reign. These weren't items that could simply be misplaced during routine housekeeping. The head groundskeeper, Thomas Whitmore, approached with obvious nervousness. His weathered hands shook slightly as he fumbled with the keys to the main entrance. Whitmore had worked on various royal properties for over 30 years and had never experienced anything like this. He explained to Matthews that only 5 staff members had access to the estate during Camilla's absence, and each had been thoroughly vetted by royal security inside the grand foyer. Matthews was struck by the elegant blend of traditional and contemporary furnishings. Oil paintings of previous monarchs gazed down from gilt frames, while modern sculptures added touches of personality to the space. Everything appeared to be in perfect order, which made the mystery even more puzzling. If someone had broken in to steal the royal keepsakes, they had done so without leaving any obvious signs of forced entry or disturbance. The team began their systematic search in the East Wing, where Camilla kept her private study and personal collections. Matthews had been briefed that this was where several of the missing items had last been documented. As they moved through each room, the tension grew palpable. The staff members who remained on the property watched anxiously from the windows, whispering among themselves about what this investigation might mean for their future employment. Mrs. Eleanor Fairfax, the head housekeeper, proved to be particularly helpful. She had maintained detailed logs of every room cleaning, every visitor, and every unusual occurrence over the past month. Her meticulous records showed that everything had been normal until approximately 10 days ago, when she noticed that a display case in the library had been rearranged. At the time, she had assumed that Camilla had made the changes before departing for Scotland. The library itself was a stunning room, lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound books, many of which were first editions or had historical significance. A large mahogany desk dominated the center of the space, its surface cluttered with correspondence and official documents. Matthews carefully examined the display case that Mrs. Fairfax had mentioned. The glass was spotless, with no fingerprints or signs of tampering. Yet something about the arrangement of the remaining items suggested that pieces were indeed missing as the afternoon wore on. The investigation team expanded their search to include the grounds surrounding the main house. The estate sprawled across several hundred acres, with numerous outbuildings, gardens, and wooded areas that could potentially hide evidence. Matthews coordinated with the royal protection officers who had maintained security during Camilla's absence. Reviewing surveillance footage and checking access logs, the breakthrough came when Constable Jenkins discovered something unusual in the rose garden behind the house. Partially hidden beneath a carefully pruned bush, he found a small piece of torn fabric that appeared to be from an expensive coat or jacket. The fabric was navy blue with a distinctive weave that suggested it came from a high-end garment. Not the type of clothing typically worn by groundskeepers or household staff. Matthews bagged the evidence carefully, her mind racing with possibilities. The fabric could belong to anyone who had legitimate access to the property, but its location seemed deliberately concealed rather than accidentally lost. She made a mental note to have the forensic team analyze it for DNA traces and to cross-reference the material with clothing worn by recent visitors to the estate, the day concluded with more questions than answers. But Matthews felt certain that they were dealing with an inside job rather than an external theft. The level of knowledge required to locate and remove the specific items, combined with the lack of obvious security breaches, pointed toward someone with intimate familiarity with both the property and the location of the royal keepsakes. As the enforcement teams prepared to return the following morning, Matthews stood in the fading twilight and surveyed the peaceful estate. Somewhere within these grounds lay the answers to a mystery that could potentially rock the very foundations of the royal family. The missing keepsakes weren't just valuable objects. They were pieces of history that connected the current royal family to their predecessors and contained secrets that some people might kill to protect. The investigation was only beginning. But Matthews already sensed that uncovering the truth would require navigating the complex web of loyalties, rivalries, and hidden agendas that existed even within the most trusted circles of the royal household. Tomorrow would bring new discoveries, and she hoped they would be closer to solving the mystery of the Queen's vanished keepsakes. Detective Inspector Matthews arrived at the estate before sunrise, determined to uncover more clues in the crisp morning air. The forensic team had worked through the night analyzing the fabric found in the rose garden, and their preliminary findings were intriguing. The material was indeed from an expensive designer coat, likely Italian-made and worth several £1,000s. More importantly, they'd found traces of a distinctive cologne that would help narrow down potential suspects. The second day of investigation brought an unexpected visitor. Charles Pemberton, Camilla's personal assistant and confidant of 15 years, had driven down from London upon hearing about the security breach. His arrival created a stir among the staff. As Pemberton was known for his fierce loyalty to the Queen Consort and his sometimes intimidating personality, he demanded to speak privately with Matthews, insisting that he had crucial information about the missing items in the privacy of Camilla's study. Pemberton revealed details that shed new light on the investigation. He explained that the missing keepsakes had been moved to this estate specifically because Camilla felt they would be safer here than at any of the official royal residences. The Queen Consort had been concerned about potential security leaks at Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle, particularly following some recent staff changes that had raised eyebrows within royal circles. Pemberton's information was disturbing for another reason. He disclosed that only 7 people knew about the location of these specific items at the Gloucestershire estate. Besides Camilla herself, the list included 3 senior royal protection officers, 2 trusted household staff members, and surprisingly, Prince William. The Prince of Wales had been informed because some of the missing items were eventually destined for him according to his grandmother's wishes. Matthews felt a chill run down her spine as she absorbed this information. The investigation had just taken on a much more serious dimension. If only 7 people knew about the keepsake's location and external security hadn't been breached, then one of the most trusted individuals in the royal circle was potentially involved in their disappearance. The political implications alone could destabilize the monarchy. During an already challenging period, the detective requested detailed background checks on all 7 individuals, though she knew that investigating members of the royal family and their closest protectors would require extreme discretion. Any leak of information could cause a media frenzy that would overshadow the actual crime. She also asked Pemberton to arrange secure communication with Prince William to determine when he had last been informed about the keepsakes and whether he had shared that information with anyone else. Meanwhile, the search of the estate continued to yield interesting discoveries. In the basement storage area, Constable Jenkins found evidence that someone had recently accessed several locked cabinets. The locks hadn't been forced, suggesting that whoever entered had possessed the correct keys or had sophisticated lock-picking skills. Dust patterns on the shelves indicated that multiple items had been moved, though it was impossible to determine exactly what had been taken without a complete inventory. Mrs. Fairfax provided another crucial piece of information. During her second interview, she remembered that approximately 2 weeks ago, she had encountered someone in the library very early in the morning. The person had claimed to be conducting a routine security inspection, wearing official credentials and speaking with authority. However, Something about the encounter had felt unusual, though she couldn't pinpoint exactly what had bothered her at the time. The housekeeper described the individual as well-dressed, probably in their 40s, with an accent that suggested education and refinement. Most troubling was her recollection that this person had been particularly interested in the display cases and had asked specific questions about the security arrangements for valuable items. Mrs. Fairfax had assumed the questions were part of a standard security review, but in retrospect, they seemed more focused than necessary. Matthews arranged for Mrs. Fairfax to work with a police sketch artist, hoping to create a visual representation of this mysterious visitor. The process proved challenging because the housekeeper had only seen the person briefly and in dim morning light. But they managed to produce a general likeness that could be circulated among royal protection officers for identification. As the day progressed, the investigation team discovered something even more significant in Camilla's private office. Hidden behind a false back in an antique writing desk, they found a small digital recording device. The device was sophisticated and expensive, designed for covert surveillance rather than casual recording. It had been positioned to capture conversations that took place at the desk, where Camilla often conducted private phone calls and meetings. The recording device contained several hours of audio from the past month, including conversations between Camilla and various royal family members, government officials, and personal friends. Matthews realized that whoever had planted the device had access to incredibly sensitive information about royal family dynamics, state matters, and personal relationships. The implications for national security were staggering. One particular conversation caught Matthews' attention. In a call recorded just 3 days before the Keepsakes went missing, Camilla had spoken with someone about concerns regarding the late Queen's personal effects. The caller's identity wasn't clear from the recording, but their voice suggested familiarity with royal protocol and intimate knowledge of family matters. They had discussed specific items that needed to be secured and mentioned concerns about certain individuals who might not respect the Queen's final wishes. The conversation had ended with an agreement to meet in person to discuss the matter further. Though no specific location or time was mentioned, Matthews instructed the technical team to enhance the audio quality in an attempt to identify background sounds that might provide clues about the caller's location during the conversation. Every detail could be crucial in unraveling this increasingly complex mystery. As evening approached, Matthews received an urgent message from her superior. Word of the investigation had somehow reached the media, despite strict confidentiality protocols. A prominent tabloid newspaper had begun asking questions about unusual police activity at royal properties. The race was now on to solve the case, before public speculation could damage the royal family's reputation and potentially compromise the investigation itself. The detective stood in the grand foyer where her investigation had begun. Surrounded by centuries of royal history and tradition, the missing keepsakes represented more than valuable objects. They were symbols of continuity and trust within the monarchy. Whoever had taken them had violated something sacred, and Matthews was determined to bring them to justice, regardless of how high-ranking or well-connected the perpetrator might prove to be. The third morning brought unexpected urgency to the investigation when Detective Inspector Matthews received a startling phone call from the forensics laboratory. The DNA analysis of the fabric found in the rose garden had produced a match in the police database. But the identity of the person was causing significant concern among the investigation team's supervisors. The fabric belonged to someone with high-level security clearance who had legitimate access to multiple royal properties. Matthews was instructed to proceed with extreme caution as she prepared to interview the individual whose DNA had been found. The person in question was Margaret Sterling, a senior royal protection officer who had served the family for over 20 years. Sterling had an impeccable service record and had been personally commended by the late Queen for her dedication and discretion. The possibility that she might be involved in the theft seemed almost impossible to believe. The interview was arranged at a secure location, away from the estate to avoid attracting attention. from either staff members or potential media observers. Sterling arrived precisely on time, her posture rigid and professional as always. She wore her standard dark suit and maintained the composed demeanor that had made her one of the most trusted members of the Royal Protection Team. However, Matthews noticed subtle signs of stress in the woman's appearance, slight dark circles under her eyes and hands that remained clenched throughout their conversation when confronted with the DNA evidence. Sterling's reaction was not what Matthews had expected. Rather than denial or surprise, the protection officer displayed what seemed like relief, as if a heavy burden was finally being lifted from her shoulders. She admitted that she had been at the estate on the day in question, but not in any official capacity. Sterling revealed that she had received an anonymous message claiming that the royal keepsakes were in danger and needed immediate protection. The message had arrived through encrypted channels typically used for legitimate security communications, making it appear authentic and urgent. Sterling explained that she had been told to conduct a discreet inspection of the items and to relocate them to a more secure location if necessary. Following protocol for such situations, she had attempted to verify the orders through official channels. But the complexity of royal security communications during Camilla's absence had made confirmation difficult. Sterling's account raised more questions than it answered. She claimed that when she arrived at the estate, she found that someone else had already accessed the areas where the keepsakes were stored. Several items were missing, and the remaining pieces appeared to have been hastily rearranged. Realizing that she had walked into the aftermath of a theft rather than preventing one, Sterling had attempted to secure the scene and gather evidence, which explained why her DNA was found on the fabric. The protection officer's story was compelling, but Matthews remained skeptical. Sterling's explanation for why she hadn't immediately reported the theft was that she had needed time to determine whether this was part of a larger security operation that she hadn't been informed about. She claimed to have spent several days attempting to contact her superiors and verify whether legitimate security measures were being implemented without her knowledge. Matthews pressed Sterling for details about the anonymous message that had prompted her visit to the estate. The protection officer provided copies of the encrypted communications, which the technical team would need to analyze for authenticity and origin. The messages were professionally crafted and used appropriate security terminology, but something about their tone suggested they might not have come from official sources during the interview. Sterling made a revelation that stunned Matthews. She disclosed that in recent months, several royal protection officers had received similar anonymous communications about potential security threats to various royal family members and their possessions. These messages had created confusion and paranoia within the protection services, as it became unclear which threats were legitimate and which might be attempts to manipulate security procedures. The pattern that Sterling described suggested a coordinated effort to create chaos and distrust within the royal protection system. Someone with intimate knowledge of security protocols was deliberately exploiting the system's complexity to create opportunities for theft or worse. The missing keepsakes might be just one part of a larger scheme designed to destabilize the monarchy from within. Matthews immediately contacted her superiors to report this new development. The possibility that multiple royal properties and family members might be at risk required an immediate expansion of the investigation. Additional resources would be needed to review all recent security communications and identify other potential threats or thefts that might have gone unnoticed. Back at the estate, the search had uncovered additional evidence in an unexpected location. Hidden in the stables, investigators found a small storage locker that contained detailed floor plans of several royal residences, including Camilla's Gloucestershire property. The plans were marked with annotations indicating the locations of security cameras, alarm systems, and safe rooms. Most disturbing were the handwritten notes that specifically identified where valuable personal items were. Typically stored the discovery of these plans, confirmed that the theft had been carefully planned by someone with access to highly classified security information. The level of detail in the annotations suggested that the perpetrator had either conducted extensive surveillance of the properties or had inside information from multiple sources within the royal household or protection services, among the papers. In the storage locker, investigators also found what appeared to be a list of potential buyers for stolen royal artifacts. The list included names and contact information for wealthy collectors known to operate in gray areas of the international art and antiquities market. Several of the names were familiar to law enforcement agencies as individuals who had previously been suspected of purchasing stolen cultural treasures. The existence of this buyer list indicated that the theft was not motivated by personal vendetta or political purposes, but rather by financial gain. The perpetrator had apparently planned to sell the royal keepsakes to private collectors who would keep them hidden from public view, making recovery nearly impossible. The commercial nature of the crime suggested a level of criminal sophistication that extended far beyond a simple household theft. As night fell on the third day of investigation, Matthews felt that they were finally making progress in understanding the scope and nature of the crime. However, the evidence also revealed that they were dealing with a conspiracy that potentially involved multiple individuals and threatened the security of the entire royal family. The missing keepsakes were no longer just stolen objects. They had become symbols of a much larger threat to the monarchy's stability and security. The detective knew that the next phase of the investigation would require delicate coordination between multiple law enforcement agencies and intelligence services. The stakes had risen far beyond a simple theft case, and the pressure to solve it quickly was mounting as media attention continued to grow despite efforts to maintain secrecy. The fourth day of investigation began with a breakthrough that changed everything. Detective Inspector Matthews received an urgent call at 5 a.m. from the technical analysis team. They had successfully traced the origin of the anonymous messages that had lured Margaret Sterling to the estate. The digital trail led to a sophisticated operation that had been running for months, targeting not just royal properties but also several high-profile private estates across England. The investigation revealed that someone had created an elaborate network of false identities and encrypted communication channels, designed to manipulate security personnel and household staff at various prestigious properties. The perpetrator had been systematically gathering intelligence about valuable items and security procedures, using trusted insiders as unwitting accomplices in reconnaissance efforts. Matthews was briefed on a disturbing pattern that had emerged from the digital forensics. The same techniques used to manipulate Sterling had been employed at least 6 other times in recent months, targeting properties belonging to prominent political figures, wealthy business leaders, and other members of the aristocracy. In each case, security personnel had received seemingly legitimate instructions that had resulted in either thefts or security breaches. The scope of the criminal operation was staggering. Investigators estimated that artifacts and valuables worth millions of pounds had been stolen through these coordinated deception campaigns. The perpetrator had demonstrated an understanding of security protocols that suggested either extensive training in protective services or access to classified information about how elite security operations functioned. At the estate, a new search of the grounds yielded additional evidence that supported the theory of a sophisticated criminal network. It's hidden in a maintenance shed. Investigators discovered high-end surveillance equipment, including cameras with telephoto lenses, electronic listening devices, and digital storage units containing hundreds of photographs of the property's interior and exterior. The photographs were particularly revealing. They showed detailed images of specific rooms, furniture arrangements, and most importantly, the exact locations where valuable items were displayed or stored. The images had been taken from multiple angles and at different times of day, suggesting that the surveillance had been conducted over an extended period. Some photographs bore timestamps, indicating that they had been taken while Camilla was in residence, which meant the perpetrator had somehow gained access to the property. During occupied periods, Mrs. Fairfax was called in to review the surveillance photographs, and her reaction was immediate and alarmed. She recognized several of the camera angles as viewpoints that would only have been possible from inside the house. Someone had been moving freely through the estate's interior spaces, photographing valuable items and security arrangements while appearing to belong there legitimately. The housekeeper studied the photographs more carefully and made a connection that sent shockwaves through the investigation team. She remembered that during Camilla's last visit to the estate, there had been a new member of the catering staff, who had been brought in to help with a small private dinner party. The individual had been well recommended and properly credentialed, but Mrs. Fairfax recalled that they had seemed unusually interested in the house's artwork and furnishings. This revelation prompted Matthews to expand the investigation to include background checks on all temporary and contract workers who had accessed the property in recent months. The list was surprisingly long and included caterers, maintenance workers, security consultants, art appraisers, and various specialists who had been brought in for specific projects or events. One name on the list immediately caught the attention of investigators. David Hartwell had been hired as a security consultant to review and update the estate's protection systems just 6 weeks before the theft. His credentials appeared legitimate, and he had been recommended through channels that seemed trustworthy. However, when investigators attempted to verify his background more thoroughly, they discovered significant discrepancies in his employment history and professional certifications. Hartwell's supposed previous employer, Prestigious Security firm in London, had no record of anyone by that name ever working for their company. The professional references he had provided were either fictional or belonged to real people who claimed never to have worked with him. Most disturbing was the discovery that the security improvements he had allegedly implemented at the estate had actually made it more vulnerable to the type of theft that had occurred. The technical team analyzing the surveillance equipment found additional evidence linking Hartwell to the crime. Digital fingerprints on the devices matched techniques and software preferences associated with his supposed previous security work. More importantly, the encryption methods used in the anonymous messages that had manipulated Sterling were identical too. Protocols that Hartwell had recommended for the estate's own security communications. Matthews realized that they were dealing with a master manipulator who had infiltrated the world of elite security services using false identities and fabricated credentials. Hartwell had positioned himself to access multiple high-value properties by presenting himself as a security expert, when in reality he was gathering intelligence for systematic thefts. The investigation team moved quickly to trace Hartwell's current whereabouts and other identities he might be using. Financial records showed that he had received large payments from anonymous offshore accounts, suggesting that he was working for wealthy clients who specialized in acquiring stolen, high-value items through sophisticated criminal operations. International law enforcement agencies were contacted when investigators discovered that Hartwell's operation extended beyond England. Similar security consultation frauds had been reported in France, Switzerland, and the United States, targeting properties owned by celebrities, politicians, and business leaders. The stolen items from these international thefts had apparently been funneled into the same network of private collectors who specialized in keeping stolen cultural artifacts hidden from authorities. As evening approached, Matthews received word that Hartwell had been located at a luxury hotel in Monaco, apparently preparing to flee to a country without extradition treaties. Local authorities were coordinating with Interpol to apprehend him before he could disappear completely. However, the detective knew that capturing Hartwell was only the beginning of unraveling his criminal network and recovering the stolen royal keepsakes. The investigation had revealed that the theft from Camilla's estate was part of a much larger criminal enterprise that threatened the security of elite properties and valuable cultural artifacts throughout Europe. The missing royal keepsakes had become symbols of a sophisticated new type of crime that exploited trust and manipulated security systems through deception and false credentials. Matthews stood in the estate's library as darkness fell, surrounded by the empty display cases that had once held treasures connected to centuries of royal history. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as they worked to dismantle Hartwell's criminal network and hopefully recover the stolen items before they disappeared forever into private collections where they might never be seen again. The fifth day dawned with dramatic news from Monaco. David Hartwell had been successfully apprehended by international law enforcement, but not before attempting to destroy crucial evidence that could lead to the recovery of the stolen royal keepsakes. When authorities raided his hotel room, they found him in the process of wiping encrypted hard drives and burning documents that appeared to contain client lists and transaction records. Detective Inspector Matthews flew to Monaco to participate in Hartwell's interrogation, knowing that this might be their only opportunity to recover the missing items before they disappeared permanently into private collections. The suspect proved to be as sophisticated and manipulative in person as his criminal operations had suggested. He was well-educated, articulate, and showed no apparent remorse for his actions. Initially, Hartwell maintained his innocence and claimed that he was being framed by competitors in the legitimate security consulting business. He presented alternative explanations for the evidence against him and attempted to shift suspicion toward other individuals who had access to the royal properties. However, as investigators presented more compelling proof of his involvement, including digital evidence and witness testimonies, his demeanor began to change. The breakthrough came when Matthews revealed that investigators had recovered some of the surveillance equipment he had hidden at various properties, including devices that contained his fingerprints and DNA evidence. Faced with overwhelming physical evidence, Hartwell finally admitted to orchestrating the theft of the royal keepsakes, but insisted that he had been working for unnamed clients who had specifically requested those particular items. Hartwell's confession revealed the disturbing scope of his criminal network. He explained that he had been recruited by a syndicate of wealthy collectors who specialized in acquiring historically significant items through theft and fraud. These collectors were willing to pay enormous sums for pieces that could never be publicly displayed or sold through legitimate channels, treating them as private trophies to be enjoyed in secret. The criminal mastermind disclosed that the royal keepsakes had been specifically targeted because of their unique historical significance and personal connection to the late Queen Elizabeth. His clients viewed these items as the ultimate prizes in their collections of stolen cultural artifacts. The syndicate had been planning the theft for over a year, carefully researching the items' locations and developing the elaborate deception that had made the theft possible. Most disturbing was Hartwell's revelation that the royal family was not his syndicate's only target. He admitted to participating in thefts from museums, private estates, and historical sites across Europe and North America. The stolen items included ancient artifacts, rare manuscripts, religious relics, and personal belongings of historical figures. The total value of the stolen items was estimated to be in the hundreds of millions of pounds. Matthews pressed Hartwell for information about the specific location of the royal keepsakes and the identities of his clients. He claimed that the items had already been transferred to his handlers and were likely being transported to secure locations, where they would be held until the investigation cooled down. However, he provided details about the handoff procedure that occurred 2 days after the theft. According to Hartwell's account, the stolen keepsakes had been passed to a courier at a private airfield outside London. The courier was part of a sophisticated transportation network that specialized in moving stolen high-value items across international borders without detection. The items would be taken to a secure storage facility where they would remain until permanent placement with private collectors could be arranged. The detective realized that they still had a chance to recover the keepsakes if they could identify and intercept the transportation network before the items reached their final destinations. Hartwell provided limited information about the courier system, claiming that he only knew about his specific role in the operation and had no direct contact with the clients or transportation coordinators. International law enforcement agencies coordinated efforts to track down the courier network and storage facilities that Hartwell had described. The investigation expanded to include authorities in several countries where similar theft operations had been detected. The scale of the criminal syndicate required unprecedented cooperation between different police forces and intelligence agencies. Back in England, the investigation team continued searching for additional evidence that might help locate the missing royal keepsakes. They focused on financial transactions and communication records that might reveal connections between Hartwell and his criminal associates. The sophisticated nature of the operation suggested that significant financial resources and technical expertise had been invested in its success. A major breakthrough occurred when investigators discovered that Hartwell had made several encrypted phone calls to a number registered in Switzerland just hours after the theft. Swiss authorities were contacted to help trace the number and identify the person or organization that had received these communications. The Swiss connection was significant because the country was known to harbor wealthy collectors who operated in legal gray areas. The phone records revealed a pattern of communications between Hartwell and Swiss contacts that extended back several months, suggesting that the theft of the royal keepsakes had been planned and coordinated over an extended period. The frequency and timing of these communications correlated with Hartwell's surveillance activities at the estate and his manipulation of the security personnel. Matthews also learned that Hartwell had received large payments through Swiss banking channels that were known to be used by individuals seeking to hide the sources of their wealth. These payments far exceeded what would be reasonable compensation for legitimate security consulting work, providing additional evidence of his involvement in criminal activities. As the fifth day concluded, Matthews felt cautiously optimistic about the prospects for recovering the stolen royal keepsakes. Hartwell's arrest and confession had provided valuable intelligence about the criminal syndicate's operations and methods. However, she knew that the next phase of the investigation would require careful coordination with international partners and possibly delicate negotiations with countries that might be harboring the stolen items. The case had evolved from a simple theft investigation into an international effort to dismantle a sophisticated criminal network that threatened cultural heritage sites and private collections worldwide. The royal keepsakes had become symbols of a new type of organized crime that exploited globalization and advanced technology to steal and transport valuable artifacts across borders with unprecedented efficiency. Matthews prepared for what she knew would be the most challenging phase of the investigation. As they worked to track down the stolen items before they disappeared forever into the shadowy world of private collectors who valued possession over public heritage, the final phase of the investigation unfolded with remarkable speed once international cooperation was fully established. Detective Inspector Matthews coordinated with Swiss authorities who had successfully traced the communications from Hartwell to a luxury compound near Geneva, owned by renowned art collector Victor Rousseau. Rousseau was known in law enforcement circles as someone who operated at the edges of legal art acquisition. Though he had never been successfully prosecuted for any crimes, the Swiss raid on Rousseau's compound was conducted with surgical precision by specialized Azusta units trained in recovering stolen cultural artifacts. The compound was vast and sophisticated, featuring climate-controlled storage facilities that housed hundreds of valuable items from around the world. Many pieces appeared to have questionable provenance, suggesting that Rousseau's collection included numerous stolen or illegally acquired artifacts in a secure vault beneath the main residence. Investigators discovered the missing royal keepsakes, carefully preserved in museum-quality storage conditions. Queen Victoria's diamond brooch gleamed under the specialized lighting. Princess Diana's handwritten letters were protected in archival folders. In the late Queen's private leather journal was housed in a custom-designed preservation case. Rousseau had apparently planned to keep these items as permanent additions to his private collection. Rousseau's arrest revealed the sophisticated nature of the international theft syndicate that Hartwell had described. The collector maintained detailed records of his acquisitions, including correspondence with various criminal contacts who specialized in obtaining specific items for wealthy clients. His files contained evidence of dozens of thefts from museums, private estates, and historical sites across multiple continents. The Swiss investigation also uncovered a disturbing pattern of corruption within certain segments of the legitimate art world. Rousseau had been working with crooked auction houses, dishonest appraisers, and corrupt museum officials to create false provenance documentation for stolen items. This network allowed stolen artifacts to eventually enter legitimate collections and markets after their criminal origins had been obscured through fraudulent paperwork. Matthews learned that the royal keepsakes had been specifically commissioned by a client who remained anonymous even in Rousseau's detailed records. This mysterious client had apparently paid an extraordinary sum for the items and had planned to display them in a private museum that was accessible only to a select group of wealthy collectors. The exclusivity and secrecy surrounding this private museum represented the ultimate expression of treating stolen cultural heritage as personal property. The investigation team worked frantically to trace the anonymous client before they could disappear or destroy evidence of their involvement. Financial records showed that payments for the royal keepsakes come through a complex network of shell companies and offshore accounts that spanned multiple jurisdictions. Unraveling this financial maze required cooperation from banking authorities in several countries and specialized forensic accountants who understood how sophisticated criminals hid their transactions. The breakthrough in identifying the mysterious client came from an unexpected source. Margaret Sterling, the royal protection officer who had been manipulated into visiting the estate, had been conducting her own investigation into the security breaches that had been plaguing royal properties. Her analysis of communication patterns and security incident reports revealed that someone with high-level access to royal family information had been systematically gathering intelligence for months. Sterling's investigation pointed towards someone within the extended royal household who had intimate knowledge of family schedules, property security arrangements, and the personal significance of various artifacts. This individual had apparently been providing inside information to the criminal syndicate, making their thefts possible by ensuring that operations occurred when properties were minimally protected and most vulnerable. The identity of this insider shocked everyone involved in the investigation. Lady Patricia Thornberry, a longtime friend of the royal family who served on several charitable boards and had regular access to royal properties, had been secretly financing the theft operations through her connections with wealthy collectors. Her gambling debts and declining personal finances had apparently motivated her to betray the trust that the royal family had placed in her for decades. Thornberry's arrest was conducted quietly, to avoid media attention that could damage the royal family's reputation or interfere with ongoing efforts to recover other stolen items. Her confession revealed that she had been providing intelligence to criminal networks for over 2 years, targeting not just royal properties, but also estates belonging to her other wealthy friends and acquaintances. The scope of Thornberry's betrayal was breathtaking. She had used her social connections and trusted status to gather information about valuable items, security arrangements, and family schedules across dozens of elite properties. Her detailed knowledge of royal family routines had made it possible for criminals like Hartwell to time their operations perfectly and avoid detection. For extended periods, Matthews discovered that Thornberry had been motivated not just by financial desperation, but also by a twisted sense of entitlement. She believed that many of the artifacts in royal and aristocratic collections should be accessible to a broader audience. She rationalized her criminal activity as a form of cultural redistribution. This justification had allowed her to maintain her relationships with victims while simultaneously betraying their trust. The recovery of the royal keepsakes became a moment of triumph for the international law enforcement collaboration. When the items were finally returned to their rightful place, Camilla personally thanked Matthews and her team for their dedication and discretion. The Queen Consort expressed particular gratitude that the investigation had been conducted without creating a media circus that could have overshadowed the significance of the recovered artifacts. The case's resolution had far-reaching implications. Beyond the recovery of the stolen items, the investigation exposed vulnerabilities in security protocols that protected not just royal properties, but elite residences and cultural institutions worldwide. New procedures were implemented to prevent the type of social engineering and insider manipulation that had made the thefts possible. Hartwell, Rousseau, and Thornberry all received significant prison sentences for their roles in the criminal syndicate. However, investigators knew that dismantling the network completely would take years of continued international cooperation. The case had revealed the existence of a sophisticated global market for stolen cultural artifacts that operated with disturbing efficiency and reach. For Matthews, The successful conclusion of the case represented both a professional triumph and a sobering reminder of how trust could be weaponized by determined criminals. The royal keepsakes were now secure. But the investigation had exposed fractures in the social fabric that surrounded institutions like the monarchy. Rebuilding that trust would require ongoing vigilance and new approaches to protecting cultural heritage from those who would exploit it for personal gain. The estate in Gloucestershire returned to its peaceful routine, but the events of those intense 6 days had changed everyone involved. Mrs. Fairfax continued her meticulous record-keeping with even greater attention to detail, and the security staff implemented new protocols designed to prevent future infiltrations. The rose garden, where the first clue had been discovered, bloomed again in the spring. But those who knew the story would forever remember it as the place where a conspiracy against the crown had begun to unravel. As Matthews filed her final report on the case, she reflected on how the investigation had demonstrated both the deep vulnerability and resilience of institutions that society trusted to preserve its cultural heritage. The royal keepsakes were safe, but the price of that security was eternal vigilance against those who would steal not just objects of value, but the history and tradition they represented for future generations.